Hey guys, welcome to another close look, and this time we're going to be looking at how to plan your essay. We're going to dive deep into how to organize the paper, and I want to give you a view from last week. Now, when we looked at the essay last week, we brainstormed topics for your essay, and we workshopped thesis statements and main ideas, and then we researched by looking at Dr. King's letters from Birmingham jail. We researched how to pull three strong examples from the text, three strong examples of the logical appeal being done by Dr. King in his letters from Birmingham jail. We looked at another strong example of his pathetic appeal, or what we call the emotional appeal. And finally, we took a look at his ethical appeals, or his appeal to the morals of his audience. And so this week we're going to be looking at, again, how to use those appeals, how to back them up inside of our essay, how to introduce a topic. And last week you also submitted an outline where you gave me a preview of how you plan to do those things. And today we're going to take a deep dive into how to plan out the essay via the introduction, okay, looking at the body paragraph, and finally looking at the conclusion. And so again, if we're going to talk about the first part of that, which is the introduction, we have to talk about the hook statement. Okay, we have to talk about the background, where we're going to look at the author, the text, and the summary. We're going to talk about the bridge statement, where you bridge the summary of the story to your specific main point. And of course, we talk about our main point, which is the thesis statement. And let's get into this really quickly. You know from your outline, okay, that you have to have an introduction. If you follow the format of the outline that was sampled for you, you know you have to have a hook statement, okay? You have to have a background and a bridge. You have to have a thesis statement with X, Y, and Z, or three examples of how your main idea is going to be proven or shown. And then you know you have to have the body, okay? The body does not necessarily have to be 3 paragraphs, but we typically say 3-paragraph body because that corresponds with X, Y, and Z, or the 3 examples given in your thesis statement. But that does not necessarily mean that you have to limit your body paragraphs to just 1 paragraph per body. But it does mean that you're going to transition, okay? You're going to use a transition phrase or statement or even word for each body paragraph, signifying to your reader that you're going to another topic. Now, the topic sentence itself has to be in that first sentence of every body paragraph, meaning the body paragraph that's dealing with that particular topic. So if your topic is pathetic appeal or emotional appeal, you have to include that language inside of your topic sentence, and your topic sentence will reveal to the reader what your main idea is. And this same thing follows for body paragraph 2 and body paragraph number 3. Then we know that we have to have a conclusion. So it's just a broad overview. Your conclusion has to highlight your main point once again in a new way, right? So you don't want to restate your thesis exactly as it was stated in the introduction, but you want to give your reader a reiteration of your thesis statement. Now, don't forget to use your transition word when you introduce this conclusion paragraph. And also don't forget to highlight your results. Again, what were your subtopics? What were X, Y, and Z, the 3 examples of your thesis statement? Give the reader a recap of all that you have gone through in the paper with them, all that you have established, and then finalize that and seal the entire paper with what I call an overarching idea. Now, this is an idea that we use to grip the reader, and it's an idea that we want to leave the reader with. It's the remaining idea, the idea that's going to travel with the reader as they leave the page, and it's an idea that you want them to ponder on. And so this is our outline, and this is how we generally think about essays. So each one of your essays should look something like this. And so if you don't have an idea of the overall structure of your essay, your intimate parts of your essay, your close parts of the essay will be a little confusing for you. So keep this in mind. This is sort of a blueprint for you for the entire essay. Now let's get into deeply looking at the hook statement. Now, what is meant by the hook statement? Of course, we think like a fish hook that brings something closer or snaps something. So that's the idea. That's the imagery we're conjuring up when we say the hook statement. You're the writer. You're launching out your hook into the water, and you're looking for a big fish, and you're trying to reel that fish in. So you're trying to reel the reader in, and your readers the hook statement is your reader's first window into the paper. It's their first window, and it's their first way of gauging whether or not they want to read further. So we need to know how to hook readers, and there are these 7 basic kinds of hooks. Not saying that there aren't more of them, but these 7 basic kinds of hooks gives you an introduction into what a hook statement looks like. Now, the hook statement is, number 1, it's an interesting question hook. Okay, that's the first kind of hook statement that you have. Next, you have a fact or statistic hook. You have a strong statement or declaration hook. You have a metaphor or a simile hook. You have what we call a story hook, a description hook, and finally a quotation hook. So when we first come into this question hook, it's a hook that a lot of students like to use, but sometimes it doesn't serve students well. Here's an example. History books are very vocal about the social and political impact men have made on the world. But how vocal have historians been on the notion of female contributions to social and political change? See, here, the topic of the essay is inside of this question, this rhetorical question, where the writer is not really looking for the reader to answer the question. The writer is posing the question as a way to suggest and inform the reader of the topic of the essay. So a lot of times we use question hooks, but in the wrong way. We use them and they're sort of a distraction, and they don't actually feed the reader the content of the paper. They just alert the reader and make the reader something provocative and sensationalize the reader and shock the reader, but don't necessarily guide the reader along to the next point, which is what a question hook desires to do. A question hook grips the reader with an idea, okay, and an idea that they may not have the answer to, and they're going to look further into the essay for the answer. It says that interesting question hook is when you ask a question that relates to your essay or paper. So this has to relate to your main theme or your main idea of your paper. And the only way a person can know the answer to that question is by reading your writing. People are inquisitive. When we hear or read a question, we want to know the answer. If we don't have an answer, then we want to find it out. So when you start your essay with an interesting question hook, this signals to your readers that if they keep reading, you'll give them the answer. And so this is the idea here, is that you're trying to hook your reader and reel them in. So you begin with something that brings them to a point of curiosity, and then you draw them closer. But the idea is you have the answer. So you don't want to ask a question in a question hook that you do not plan on answering. You also don't want to ask a question that maybe is unanswerable. It has to be answerable. And so keep this in mind as you practice the question hook and see if it works best for you. Next, we have the fact or statistic hook. Okay, here's an example. Almost 2/3 of Americans, adults, at some point in their life, have lived at home with at least one gun. So have lived in a home with at least one gun. So this is supposed to shock the reader, right? This is not a boring fact. This is a very informative and provocative fact that is going to deal with probably the topic of gun control, right? So it hooks your reader because they give real information about the topic. You can impress your reader with your knowledge and evidence from the very beginning of your essay. Okay, so facts can also be very, again, sensationalizing to readers, okay, who are shocked into reading more. However, you are only permitted to use facts that are accurate. So you're not just here to shock people, but you're also here to provide valid and reliable and interesting information. So you wouldn't want to pick a fact that's not interesting, but you also wouldn't want to pick a fact that is going to shock the reader for the sake of shocking them, but it's not really accurate. So have you ever read a fact statistic that was the beginning of an essay, but it was completely wrong, but it grabbed the reader's attention, but it was wrong, and for the rest of the paper, you can't really rely or trust that writer. So evaluate your information and make sure it comes from a credible source before you use that fact or statistic hook. Our next one is the strong statement or declaration hook. Now, here's an example of this one. Freedom that is only given to a few is not freedom at all. So a strong statement hook is a sentence that makes an assertive claim about your topic. I want you to go look up that word assertive. For early in the paper, it connects your reader to your general main idea or stance. Okay, it is the more general idea of this thesis statement, and it reveals your hand just a little. So it reveals your hand. It's the more general idea of your thesis statement, and a strong statement is a great technique because it doesn't matter if your reader agrees or disagrees with their statement. It really doesn't matter whether or not they align with you or not. The strong statement hook forces them to see how you're going to support your ideas. So again, it does not matter if the statement is strong and therefore people can't agree with it. That may make them interested in seeing how you're going to support such a strong statement. Freedom that is only given to a few is not freedom at all. So we can assume that this paper is going to go into what makes freedom really something that is if it's not given to everyone, what are the qualities of that kind of freedom? It may be a paper that's going to go into the idea that we cannot exclude people from having freedom. And so maybe it's going to focus on people who are marginalized. And so this particular topic, whether you agree with it or not, you may be interested in how the writer is going to support their points. And then we come to the metaphor or the simile hook. Now, here's an example of this one. Patriotism is a cracked and rusty shield around a nation's people. So patriotism here is being compared to a cracked and rusty shield. And this is what metaphors and similes do. This is figurative language, okay, or literary devices that compare two or more things, but mostly just two things, right? Compare two things that are seemingly dissimilar. So they're probably not very alike. So a patriotism and shield are two things that are pretty different, right? One's a concept, one's an object. And so a metaphor or a simile compares these two things, and a simile does this comparison by using the words like or as. And a metaphor simply makes the comparison. So here we see a metaphor. It says patriotism is a cracked and rusty shield, versus patriotism is like a cracked and rusty shield. A common simile that we've heard in films is life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So there, Forrest Gump, we see the comparison between life, okay, and a box of chocolates. And the result, you never know what you're going to get. See, that kind of comparison or that kind of contrast between those two things heightens our awareness of how they're connected and how they're different. And mostly it draws our attention to what the writer wants us to see in terms of seeing something new about something like life or something like patriotism. In what ways is patriotism something that is negative in society? And this text is saying it's a cracked and rusty shield around a nation's people. Now you're interested to see how they're going to support that. So the metaphor or simile hook engages your readers because it makes them think about a topic in a different way. Your audience wonders what you mean and how you compare a topic to something that seems unconnected. Again, a metaphor is a figure of speech that directly compares one thing to another. But these two things may seem unrelated, but it's the writer's job to show their connection and thereby showing something new about that initial concept. And in this case, it is patriotism. Next, we have our description hook. Here's an example. On August 28th, approximately hundreds of thousands of people, black and white, male and female, young and old, assembled at the nation's capital. They came from various distances and braved the hot sun to participate in one of the most iconic moments in history, the March on Washington. So this is a hook where a vivid description, okay, you may even call it a report of a scene, okay, draws your readers into your writing. So again, this is not per se imagery. This is a description or a report of person, place, or thing or event. A good description hook will make your reader want to know what comes next in your writing. So what was the point of introducing this? And they want to read a little bit more. It's more popular in narrative essays, okay, but you can use a description hook with any type of writing. Yes, even academic papers, okay? Like the story hook, which we're going to look at later, you have to ask yourself, will this hook be acceptable in the course? So meaning, will the hook be appropriate, okay, for the type of essay, the genre that you're dealing with? So with this particular hook here, you have to make sure that what you're describing, what you're reporting on is absolutely relevant and effective, and that it's not taking up too much space, because with this hook and with the story hook that we're going to talk about, both of those hooks seem to have, they seem to have this ability to grip the reader, but they use a lot of language and a lot of words. So it's our job to make sure that we use this hook only in the circumstances where it can actually be effective. You don't want to be too wordy with this hook. And so let's look at the story hook. The story hook is a hook that uses imagery, right? It uses imagery, and it uses vivid imagery, and it uses a lot of emotional appeals and pathos to appeal to the reader. Now, when it comes to the story hook, here's an example. Story has it that the woman was tired. She was physically tired after a long day of work. Her feet were sore. Sweat trickled down her brow. This is true. However, she was perhaps more tired of the racial discrimination she faced each day. So it was that Rosa Parks refused to adhere to Alabama's Jim Crow laws on December 1st, 1955. So a story hook grips the reader with vivid details, right? It gives the reader a scene. It paints a portrait. It paints the scene in an event. It doesn't report, so it shows. It doesn't tell. It doesn't report what happened. It makes the reader emotionally involved. The words there are rich, emotion-laden words, and they're there to evoke a sense of emotional attachment to the events, and it brings up important concepts that will later be discussed in a more rational way, but it introduces this emotional aspect in the beginning to grip the reader. And if we go all the way back and we look at all of our different kinds of hooks, we'll notice that they all have a sort of goal, right? Their goal is to grip the reader to do something more, okay, to deliver their points. So it's like an open door, right? A door that is open, or a window that's open, that allows you to connect with the reader and open something that will give them a sensibility to your topic. And again, that's something that the quotation hook does. The quotation hook also uses some emotional appeals, and it allows you to basically look at the words of someone in history, someone who was well renowned. And this is sort of something that builds your credibility by relying on people who are very experienced. So you use a quotation to begin your work, but make sure that as you begin your work with the quotation, you do not settle by just putting the quotation on the page without first integrating it with your own words. And it will look something like saying, according to Nelson Mandela, education is the most powerful resource that we can use to change the world. Okay, so you would have to cite that. Okay, you would also have to integrate that quote. No quote can stand on its own unless it's a box quote. And even then, we do some things to make sure that we integrate it into the text. But you cannot begin a sentence with a quotation mark. So keep that in mind. Your sentences cannot begin with quotation marks, okay? Sentences do not begin in punctuation. They begin with words. So you have to word your language and then introduce that particular quotation. So you have these 7 kinds of hooks, and then after you present the hook, it's pretty normal to introduce the author and the text, okay, that you're examining. If you don't have an author or a text, you do some background. So background basically is that you're going to give context for your paper. No subject exists in a vacuum. You know from previous rhetorical analysis paper, this paper right here, you know that there's a situation that catalyzes every conversation. So we looked at the rhetorical situation, okay, which is the purpose for which, or the exigence and the stimulus, whatever motivates us to use rhetoric. The rhetorical situation includes the understanding of context, culture, issues, the author, the audience. And so for this particular part of the paper, after you've moved from the hook, you want to introduce the author of the text and the text itself, and you want to give a brief summary of the text because you don't want to assume that your reader has read this. Philosophically, theoretically, when we write, we don't necessarily write as though people are ignorant of our topic, but we write as though, let's say, for instance, your topic or your paper falls to the ground and someone comes by and they pick it up. Well, we write so that anyone who picks it up, whatever their station, whatever their background, they can read it, understand what we're talking about, where we're going, and gain a full understanding just based off of our paper. They won't need to read the text because we're going to give a brief summary. Okay, so we give this analogy because a lot of times students rely on the professor or the instructor's understanding of the text, and for that reason they leave so many details out. But this background section is very important. It sort of makes sure that the reader has a foundation for what's about to be discussed in the paper, and from there you can provide additional summaries within the body paragraphs. You can provide additional evidence and information, but you've laid the foundation and you've given them access to the conversation because you've given them the summary. So we consider all of these variables and ask ourselves as writers, okay, what does the reader need to know? What is most important for this paper's purposes? So when you're doing the Dr. King letters from Birmingham Joe, what does the reader need to know about that text? What is the most important thing they need to know about that text? Can you give an overview of a text? And when you do this, this is something that should be done in about 2 sentences. You should not use too many words to complete this portion of the background. Background does not require you to rehash every event of the story or the text. It does mean that you give people an overview of what has happened in the text, an overview that is sufficient for your thesis and what you're about to do with the text. So again, in this section here, we have the story hook, okay, that we read just a couple pages ago. And following the story hook, we have the background, okay? So the background would give information on who Rosa Parks was. It says, so story has it that the woman is vague at that point because we're going to introduce this woman. The woman was tired. She was physically tired after a long day of work. Her feet were sore. Sweat trickled down her brow. This is true. However, she was perhaps more tired of the racial discrimination she faced each day. So it was that Montgomery bus boycott began with the defiance of one woman. Then we give background. We introduce that woman. If it's not a person that you're talking about, it's an author. Introduce the author and a text. Rosa Parks was arrested on December 1st, 1955, after she refused to give up her seat on a crowded bus to a white passenger. Parks and many like her were the victims of rigid de facto laws that discriminated against blacks on the basis of race. And so, with this background, we give an overview not only of the event that we're talking about with Rosa Parks, but we give a background as to the general topic of the story. And the general topic, again, of this essay seems to be about race or about Parks being like many like her. So, who are we talking about? And so, again, as I showed you in class, when we write an introduction, and we're trying to get to our thesis, we're going from something called broad to specific. We're moving from broad to specific. So we move broadly from emotions and human interaction and bus boycott, and then we got into a specific event that happened on December 1st, 1955, and then we got to a specific woman whose act of defiance triggered the whole world to change, and then we're going to get into background on who that woman was, and then now we're getting into Parks and many like her. So this is intriguing the reader who's interested in where is this about to go. Okay. And so once you've given background, the goal is that you're transitioning and guiding your reader to the main point. Okay. Of moving from broad ideas to a very specific idea. You're guiding your reader to the main point of your essay. You're getting closer and closer to that main point. And so as you transition your reader from the background, you need to give them a bridge. Okay. You need to give them something that connects the summary and the background and the author to what you are actually trying to say about the text that you are analyzing. So we all know what happened with Rosa Parks. We all know that about the Montgomery bus boycott. We understand those things, but we may have different perspectives on what those things mean. We may have different angles and outlooks and results depending on what we want to investigate and what we want to communicate. That means that we will not be just simply throwing our thesis into the paper as though everyone will understand. We will guide the reader by giving them a bridge from the events to our specific ideas. And so we get even more narrow. Okay, it says the NAACP realized that Parks was the right person to work on this battle against the system of segregation in Montgomery. However, she was not only the right person, she was the right woman. So, we're getting even more focused. We're not just talking about the Montgomery bus boycott. This is an introduction, a way to get us to talk about women. Okay, so now we're here. I want to actually take you back before we talk about the thesis. Okay, because the purpose is to bring us to the thesis point. But let's go back to that particular question hook that we looked at in the beginning. History books are very vocal about the social and political impact men have made in the world, but how vocal have historians been on the notion of female contributions to social and political change? So this is the hook. So this could be a hook that easily replaces the story hook that we have here. Okay, and it lets us know that we're talking about women and womanhood and women's impact. Okay, so this one could even replace the story hook and introduce Rosa Parks. And then by introducing Rosa Parks and giving background, it can provide a thesis that answers that question that we saw in the beginning. So this thesis is something that generally answers the question that the essay poses. Okay, so there's a question involved in all writing, and your thesis typically answers that question. It's your claim or your main idea that you will be asserting as the answer to a question, and you will be supporting it throughout the essay. So this is the most important maybe sentence of your essay. It's usually 1 to 2 sentences, and it defines the focus of the essay. And a strong thesis does a bit more than just, suggest or assert something. A strong thesis statement goes again from broad to specific. Okay, you have to target specific ways, okay, that your assertion is true. So specific ways that you're going to show that what you believe and what you think and your idea is valid and provable and clear and intelligent, and you're going to communicate that throughout the essay with 3 main subpoints. So a strong thesis statement showcases the 3 subpoints of the main idea. And then a strong thesis also acts as a blueprint for the essay. I tell students all the time, when you go to a restaurant and you look at the menu and you decide that you want a steak, okay, you want it well done, you want it with asparagus and mashed potatoes and gravy. When you decide that you want that particular order of things, in the way that you said it, in the way that you saw it on the menu, pictured as you pictured, must be what the waiter returns to you. And in this case, you are the waiter, okay? You are the person who is delivering and communicating desired things to the person reading. And so when you said that you were going to have mashed potatoes, asparagus, and you were going to have a steak that was well done, that should be what you deliver. So this is a menu, a blueprint. The thesis operates as a way to keep you accountable for what you said you would do, and the thesis statement is a blueprint for the entire essay. Let's look at an example of that, okay? So it's 2 parts of the thesis. The first part is you clearly convey your position. Remember, again, this is 1 to 2 sentences. So throughout history, this is a position that this particular writer is taking, and there are multiple ways and multiple positions to take. Throughout history, women have been instruments of great political and social change. Okay, so this is one aspect and one idea among many. So some might say women have not been great instruments of political and social change. Some might say women have been passive instruments. Some might say women have not been allowed to participate in movements. And all of those ideas can be true, but they must be supported with evidence. And so that's why we have the second part of the thesis, which shows the particular pieces of evidence that will be used to demonstrate the validity of our thesis. So the reasoning behind your position. So first, make sure that your initial statement, that you have a position on a topic, that you're not just restating a fact, that you actually have a position, and then give your reasoning in 3 parts. How is what you just said, how is it true? So it says, when surveying the lives of 3 iconic women, Harriet Tubman, Emma Goldman, and Mahalia Jackson, one can see the undeniable social and political contributions women have made in the world. So we're talking about the contributions that women have made in the world. Now, the test for this thesis is, does it answer the question? The question was that history books are very vocal about the social and political impact men have made in the world, but how vocal have historians been on the notion of female contributions? So how vocal have history books been on the notion of female contributions to social and political change? Our thesis says throughout history, women have been instruments of great political change. Okay, so when surveying the lives of these 3 women, one can see the undeniable social and political contributions women have made to the world around them. So it's saying women have indeed been very, very vocal. They've been very present historically, socially, politically, and they have made great contributions. So this essay is all about the contributions that women have made. Now, once you do this thesis statement and you have your 3 ways that you're going to show that your idea, your initial assertion is true, you may also want to go a step further with something we call signposting. Okay, you may want to use the thesis and final statement to map out the essay for the reader. Okay, so when you see signs on the road, you know what they mean. If you see a stop sign, you know what it means stop. If you see the yield sign, you know what it means yield. And if you see a roadblock sign, you know it means there's a roadblock up ahead. The same is true for your essay. Now, the idea here is that you've presented the topic for the 3 body paragraphs, but just how are you going to show that Harriet Tubman, Emma Goldman, and Mahalia Jackson were politically and socially positive forces? for history and for change. Well, signposting shows exactly how you're going to do that. And so here's an example. It says each of these women made long lasting impacts on issues of enslavement in regards to Harriet Tubman, political tyranny in regards to Emma Goldman, and great racial discrimination in regards to Mahalia Jackson. And you say the word respectively because respectively lets your reader know that there's a parallelism between first, second, and third. Okay? First, second, and third being Harriet Tubman, who was listed first, Emma Goldman, who was listed second, and Mahalia Jackson, who was listed third. Now, this lets your reader understand that all these topics don't apply to just one person, but they apply to them individually, or as we say, respectively. So this is your blueprint. And again, we treat it like a menu. You are the waiter, the reader is the customer. Use the main claims in this thesis statement. Use these claims inside of your topic sentences, we'll talk about next, but make sure that you actually deliver, okay? That you deliver on enslavement, political tyranny, racial discrimination as it regards to Harriet Tubman, as it regards to Emma Goldman, and as it regards to Mahalia Jackson. Now, how do you do that? How do you make sure that you allow your essay to revert back to the original thesis statement and that you use it as a blueprint? Well, the first idea is that you use transition words which guide your reader from point to point and separates logically and organizes your ideas. So you don't want to blend ideas. You never want to mistake one sign for another sign and have your essay talking about Mahalia Jackson and enslavement, okay, or misplaced political tyranny and talk about Harriet Tubman. No, your first body paragraph should be about Harriet Tubman and her contribution to enslavement. Second body paragraph, as signposted, should be about Emma Goldman and her contribution via political tyranny and how she combated that. Your third signpost tells us that Mahalia Jackson was great because of her stance on racial discrimination and her contributions to the 60s movement via racial discrimination. This is your blueprint. And so it follows that your body paragraph would section off each part, that you would have a first, second, third, that you would have a transition word that guides your reader and separates logically and divides the portions of the text that deal with one topic versus another. So you have first, second, and third. You have a great deal of other kinds of transition words, phrases, and concepts. And you can look that up online to get a variation of kinds of transitions that you might want to use. And the transition word provides the introduction to your body paragraphs. And your introduction to your body paragraphs are done with just one sentence called the topic sentence. The topic sentence is the main idea of your body paragraph, and it introduces the main concept that you're about to unfold. So here's an example of one. First, one can see the undeniable impact women have made on history and politics based on the life of Harriet Tubman. So here we have the word Harriet Tubman, which was one of our signposts. Okay, it lets the reader know we're right, where we're supposed to be. What we said was going to be on the menu is on the menu. Steak is here. Okay, so Harriet Tubman is present. And then we explain that topic sentence. Okay, we might add in that Harriet Tubman was very great in the time of enslavement. Oh, remember that we talked about enslavement has to be there as it corresponds to Harriet Tubman. So when we explain Harriet Tubman's role, we explain enslavement, and then we give evidence, okay, for how Harriet Tubman was contributing to political and social change by being a part of the Underground Railroad, or freedom and delivering people out of enslavement. And so you give evidence for that. You cite examples from a text, or you cite examples from history books or articles. And so evidence is provided. You then elaborate on that evidence, okay, making sure that you cited the evidence correctly, that you have in-text citations, and you elaborate on it, meaning that when you use evidence, you don't just drop it there and let it go and finish as though you've said everything you need to say. Actually, you need to unpack that evidence, elaborate on the meaning of the evidence, okay? What does it actually mean? And you need to unpack that for the reader, because it's not their job to do it. You're the one who has the burden of proof, who has to prove your point and your opinion and your ideas. So you have to elaborate on the evidence. And finally, once you've elaborated, you reiterate. You reiterate the thesis to seal the entire paragraph. So you restate your main idea or your main point. And this rhythm between explaining and evidence, elaboration, reiteration, it may not always look the same. So, for example, you may not always give evidence and go to elaboration and then go to reiteration. You may give evidence, explain, give evidence, elaborate. You may even give evidence, elaborate, give more evidence, and then elaborate some more, and then reiterate your position. Okay, you might even begin, okay, right after giving your the topics, and you might even just drop a quote right there, okay, a quote that elaborates, explains, and provides evidence all in one. But then you always have to give commentary, okay? So I never want you to think that when you give your quotation or you give your evidence that you don't have to give any commentary. You're the one responsible for making that quote meaningful. That quote's meaning is not just going to be something that is naturally just comes to the reader, just magically appears on the page just because you put it there. And then your credibility as a writer isn't just automatically going to rise simply because you quoted someone, because they have credibility of their own. You as a writer have to be able to use your own language, your own words to unpack and to interpret the usefulness of that quote as it pertains to your topic. And so when we reiterate, we have to come back full circle and restate our purpose, restate our idea. Here's an example. From this perspective, women like Harriet Tubman have been forces for change in history and politics. So again, they reiterate the main idea and make sure that they've supplemented the initial thesis in the intro paragraph with this reiteration so that the person can stay on track with the main point. So why mention Harriet Tubman? Once again, because Harriet Tubman, like many other women, have been forces for change in history and politics. So that's typically how every body paragraph should go. And then you have your conclusion, okay? So each body paragraph should look something like this in terms of structure. And in your conclusion, what you're going to do, you're going to again have a transition word. In conclusion, as a result, finally, as mentioned above, all in all of these things are appropriate. You can also look up various different transition phrases for conclusions online, and you will find, I'm sure, many that you have never heard of or never used before. And so you have to begin with the transition word to notify your reader that they're in the conclusion. And secondly, again, you restate your main idea, but now you restate the main idea of the whole paper. So you restate the thesis in a brand new way. And by stating the thesis, you address the three subtopics once again. So here's an example. In spite of their difference in race, time period, and obstacles as women, Harriet Tubman, Emma Goldman, and Jackson have all contributed to a great deal to positive political and historical change. So again, despite their race, their time period, and despite their obstacle as women, as seen in the lives of Tubman, Goldman, and Jackson, women have contributed a great deal to positive political and historical change. So this is the thing that addresses subtopics that were seen previously in the essay, and the first in the thesis statement as X, Y, and Z, and secondly, again, in the body paragraph in the topic sentences, explained and given evidence and elaborating and reiterating. You've seen these truths, okay? And so your reader should be well acquainted with these ideas. And so by the time you finish, you should have reiterated your idea, and you should be well beyond the topic, meaning that you should be ready to give the reader what we call an overarching idea. So give the reader a new and lasting insight that will cause them to think even as they leave your paper. Give the reader something to think about. So you've talked about women and their role. So now what can you say to give the reader something to chew on as they leave? So this is like dessert, right? If you're talking about the food and the menu, this is the pecan pie with whipped cream, or this is a red velvet cake with cream cheese. This is a cherry on top of a very delicious meal. And so you want to give the reader something to think about. Okay, so it might look differently for every writing, but the overarching idea is something that touches on the points, but it launches the reader into an even higher and even more elevated realm of thinking. So you may apply ideas and concepts to your writing. You may draw the reader to think about how this idea is present in our day-to-day life, you might even cause the reader to reflect a little bit on how they might see women being portrayed in film, and what responsibility they have to see women in a new light. It all depends on your purposes in the paper. And so let's review, okay? We've learned so far that for every paper, you need an interesting hook, okay, to capture the attention of your reader. You have 7 that you can choose from that you've learned about so far. And then we learned that you have to have a background, that you have to mention the author with their full name, and you have to talk about the text, okay? You have to put that text there and in full, and you have to give a summary that's 1 to 2 sentences that gives the reader relevant clues, context, and information about your topic. Because again, we're moving from broad to specific. And as we get more specific, you bridge the thesis with the summary that you have just given. So you bridge the background to a concise pair of sentences that sum up your main argument, your main claim, or your main purpose in the paper. And we use signposts, okay, as we saw before, the signposts that we had about enslavement, so, about political tyranny and about racial discrimination. Those signposts are things that we see in our thesis that we expect to see inside the body paragraph, respectively. So we expect to see X, Y, and Z. And so we expect to see again how exactly are we going to see X, Y, and Z? The body paragraph presents the topic sentence with a transition word. So X, Y, and Z is going to be presented inside the body paragraph. Guide the reader by giving them a transition word to organize your ideas and nudge them in the right direction from point to point. Don't kick them. Don't throw them off a bridge. Nudge them, meaning that you don't just drop ideas onto a page, you guide the reader along using language. Topic sentences give readers the ability to follow you without any errors and without any jarring information. They follow along seamlessly. And as a writer, it gives you some assistance in staying on track. And by stating the main idea of each body paragraph, you're holding yourself accountable to what you said you would deliver on. So the order of the paragraphs should follow the thesis subpoints X, Y, and Z. So if you put X first, you put Y second, you put Z last, you should not have Z first as a body paragraph. X next and then Y last. No, you should maintain the exact order that you presented in your thesis statement. And of course, for your body paragraph, you're going to explain the topic sentence that you just asserted. You're going to give evidence for that explanation. You're going to elaborate on the evidence, meaning you're going to give some commentary on what it actually means. And then, of course, you're going to reiterate your thesis. And you don't leave that paragraph until you have reiterated the thesis. So when you think about a body paragraph, it's almost like a mini essay. It has an intro, it has a body, and it has a conclusion. So that's what we see here. The transition word in the topic sentence is the intro. Okay, the body is explaining, providing evidence, and giving elaboration. That's our 3 things that we have to do within the body. And then finally, we have a conclusion, which is where we reiterate the main point. So think about it that way. Think about your body paragraph, each of them operating as a mini essay, a miniature essay. It has an introduction, as seen in the transition word, and topic sentence, and it also has 3 points that you have to hit. You have to explain, provide evidence, and elaborate. And then you have to reiterate as your conclusion. Okay? So this is what we mean by conclusion. Again, transition word, guide the reader, restate your thesis, okay? Touch on the 3 main points of final time. Readers have seen how Mahalia Jackson, Emma Goldman, and Harriet Tubman have contributed to political and social change throughout history. Okay, that's your reiteration of your 3 X, Y, and Z. Then give an overarching idea. But we wonder how well readers are acquainted with various women throughout history, women from diverse backgrounds who have contributed to not only political history, but modern day present change that is happening. So give the reader something to think about everyday women, from nurses, okay, to mothers, okay, to politicians, to business women, thinking about how we understand and shape history, okay, based off of the participants, and how we may exclude and marginalize certain people. So a lasting idea there may be that we have to stop marginalizing certain people and their impact, not only in history, but in the present as well. So that would be an overarching idea. So make sure that you're including all of these parts in your essay. And so next week, you guys have your rhetorical analysis quiz that is due. Okay, it is going to be due actually tonight, which is Friday the 18th. Now it's due tonight because your draft is due tomorrow, and you had about 2 weeks to get the perfect grade on your rhetorical analysis quiz that is due anytime before the draft date. So the draft is due tomorrow, February 19th at 11:59 p.m. Then, when you submit your draft, as I told you in class, you submit in two places. So you're going to go to the lesson 3 folder. You're going to click on essay Dropbox, okay? And in essay Dropbox, you're going to make sure that, or I think it actually says rhetorical analysis paper. Click on rhetorical analysis paper. It's a folder where you're going to see 3 items. The first is the draft. The second is what we call the community peer review. And the third is the final paper. You're going to make sure that you put your draft in the draft section as well as what we call the peer review section, because this coming Monday you're going to review a peer, okay? One person that has not yet been reviewed. You're going to review them according to the rubric, and you're going to score them in every category, and you're going to give them a complete score as well as a score for every category, and you're going to give them 250 words of feedback about how they can improve their essay. And this will be due this coming Monday, February 21st, by 11:59 p.m. We do not have class this coming Tuesday because you were scheduled by the library for a virtual library workshop at 5 p.m. So you have to go and register for that. That was in the announcements page. And I'll try and make sure that that link is also in the announcements for this assignment. So you can go back if you haven't done so already. Go back and register for that. It will take place online at 5 p.m. During our normal class time, and you will be required to engage in that and participate in that. If that time is not a good time for you, there are a lot of other options for you for virtual online sessions, and there's even an online session that I think the library gives to students. But students, I think, have to ask for that video. So this is the things that you have to do for next week, and the days that are approaching. I hope that you have a very pleasant week. And if you have any questions, again, you know where to reach me via email. You know my office hours. I would not call that number because for office hours, obviously, I may be in my office, but I may not be in my office as well. So that's just a hit or miss. But if you want to reach me, write in the Ask the Instructor forum online or email me at jean-pierre@gwinnettech.edu. And that is our session for today. If you have any questions, let me know, and have a great time planning your essay. I look forward to reading them.